I'm joined by, I think somebody that everybody considers a big brother in African football journalism, one of the sharpest minds in African football, somebody that's been doing it the longest as well, without making too many jokes about age. But this is Colin Udoh, Nigerian journalist, and I think somebody that's very, very familiar with the Women's African Cup of Nations and that has been covering it for a long period of time. So there's nobody I'd rather be speaking to really on the eve of the final of the WAFCON, in which his country, Nigeria, is going to be playing against host Morocco. Colin, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Maher. It's a pleasure to be here. I love the show. It's fantastic, and I listen to it as much as I can. So, honored to be invited on.
That really means a lot coming from you, honestly. It really does. Colin, quick one. Winning the 10th WAFCON, does that make it a little bit more special than usual?
I think for Nigeria, the WAFCON is always important. And just to put some context behind that, our former coach, Randy Waldrum, when he was here last time, he failed to win it, and the whole country descended on him. Now, in a recent interview, he said that when he went to the WAFCON, after that quarterfinal against Cameroon, he thought he had done the most important thing, which was qualify for the World Cup. And so even though there was some shenanigans going on behind the scenes that led to the loss against Zambia, he felt that, look, it shouldn't be that big of a deal because, hey, the World Cup should be the most important thing. But he said it was after that loss that he realized just how big WAFCON meant to Nigeria. So it's something that all of us as Nigerians almost consider a birthright. And so to not win it is considered a major, major fear. And I think the only coach who has failed to win the WAFCON and kept his job is Randy Waldrum. And I think would say it's probably because he was foreign. Because any other coach was Nigerian who lost the WAFCON. I think we had a fourth place in 2012, and then again in 20 is it 22 no, 08. Yeah, but coaches were fired. So winning the WAFCON is at the very minimum expectation for Nigeria Super Falcons coach. That's how
That,
important
like,
it is.
yeah, that's what it comes down to is expectations. And I think when you feel that way about a competition like Al Ahly does about the CAF Champions League, like Real Madrid does about the UEFA Champions League, that really shows a huge amount of supremacy. And yeah, I think it's a great place to be in. Can you tell me when was the first time you remember watching the WAFCON, or when was the first time you covered it?
98. Well, I mean, when as a tournament, yes, 98. But I watched 1991 qualifiers. I watched 95 qualifiers. But 98 was when it started as a tournament. I think I had just come out of university at the time. I was in youth service and I was watching the game. And I was like, oh my God. So, I've been watching it since the very, very beginning. I haven't missed a single tournament from a watching point of view. But for coverage, I think I covered the 2000 tournament in South Africa. And I've got a very interesting story coming out about that 2000 tournament, which I'm not sure if I should tell you now, but I probably will. Um, but well, it's no secret. Our goalkeeper, Anne Chejine, was pregnant while she was at that tournament. So she was keeping goal and she was pregnant. And so it's not a secret anymore. I mean, it was discovered after they came back because she was ill. She went to hospital, they ran tests, they found that she was pregnant. And she had been pregnant at the Olympic Games and pregnant at the African Women Championship, as she was called at the time. So that kid is 25 years old now. And so I spoke to both of them, her and the kid, and it's a story that's going to come out on ESPN. But like I said, I've covered it from, I watched it in 98, and then I've covered it from 2000. So I think there are only very few people in Africa who have covered the WAFCON more than I have.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's the perfect person to ask. I mean, how has it changed? I know obviously it's changed dramatically, but can you maybe give some basic comparisons from the first time you remember watching the WAFCON to now?
Yeah. In fact, again, that's another article that I'm doing, and I'll talk about a little bit about that in a bit. But I think the way it has evolved has been, um, you know, how the influx of players who were born abroad and the diaspora players who've come in '98. Every single player played in Africa and the best league at the time. In fact, Nigeria was the only country that had a running league. We've had a running league since 1991. In fact, since 1990, as far back as then. No other country in Africa had a league. In fact,
Let me cut you off. Why does Nigeria have such a head start compared to the rest of the continent? Well, how does that happen?
um, to be honest, I couldn't tell you, but I guess it's just that we had players who, or at least people who were ready to invest in the women's game from day one. Because we had girls who were playing with boys, they didn't have a space to play, and then you had people like Princess Bola Jegede, Elder Eddie Kujibola, who sort of like, and then Larry Eze, who saw the women's game that it had a future, and so they invested in it. They had to all the clubs at the time were privately owned clubs. None of them, unlike now where we have government owned clubs everywhere. They were all privately owned and funded by these individuals. So they helped create that head start, for women's football in Africa. And I think they all deserve a lot of credit for what they did. So Nigeria worldwide was the first professional women's league in the world before even USA, anybody, and
Wow.
that league it has stayed professional up until today. And unfortunately, it hasn't developed the way it should, but it has always been professional. And so the first players to get endorsements, like proper endorsements, in Africa, I'm not quite sure. I need to research to see if you have where Mercy, Florence Magbemi, and Patience Avre, they had Pepsi sponsorships at the time, back then. So Nigeria had that. And so what has changed? So like I said, just going back to the thread of the question that you asked as to what has changed is that at the time, every player who was playing at the AWC, as it was called, in the African Women's Championship, was based in Africa. Now, as of 2000, there was only one player playing abroad, and that player was Mercy Akide. Now, the reason why was because after her performances at the 1991 World Cup, she got recruited to play college football in the USA, and then from there went professional to play with the San Diego Spirit. So as of 2000, she was the only professional player playing in at the African Women's Championship. But now, almost, I think I was looking. I think the stats is about almost 90% of the players in about 80%, I think, of the players in the AWC now play abroad. So that's the major shift that has happened, in the sense that we've got so many players playing abroad, and also so many players who were born abroad, diaspora players who've come back home to play. In fact, and I'll give you a little bit of a nugget. Guess the team that has the most um, diaspora born players playing for them at this WAFCON. Quick guess.
Is it Algeria?
Algeria. You've got 20 out of 24 players from diaspora players playing for them. So good. That was a good guess.
I think
But I
it was
mean,
one that.
I can imagine why you.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's one thing where I think it's a richness that Algeria has as a resource to go and pull into that pool of the diaspora players born in France or around Europe. But at the same time, it shouldn't be a crutch that the federation relies on. They have to try to develop local talent as well. But I'm afraid they just get too comfortable at times relying on the diaspora. So it can be a good and bad thing at the same time.
Yeah, and the reason why, that's a very good point to make, because you look at the Algerian team, those players are not significantly better than the players who they come, and that's why you see them. They barely made it past the group phase. So if Algeria were to do the same thing Morocco is doing, which is develop the game at home. I mean, Morocco has some of the players coming in, but I think it's, from the way I see it, looks like more of a short-term fix.
Yes, it's more of a compliment.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. So I think Algeria needs to go the same route, stop importing wholesale, and just focus on developing, a two-pronged approach.
Completely agree. Can we talk about this generation of Nigerian Super Falcons? Because yeah, I was looking at the age of the starting lineup. They're quite young, right? It seems like a generation of players that was almost brought in around the last World Cup, and they've come together and they've crystallized and they've become a new team. Perhaps a possible golden generation coming up.
It's possible. The way I see it now is just like we're talking about Algeria. We need to develop more players homegrown players that would fit in there, because Randy Waldron started a process where he integrated a lot of diaspora players in, and I love them because they brought a lot of diversity into the team. Um, but at the same time, again, you don't want to use that as a crutch, to say, hey, look, these players were playing abroad, so they must come in here and play. Everybody's got to earn their spots. And so I think that this is a really, really good generation of players. Unfortunately, there are some who are like, going onto the wrong side of 30 and might be phasing out, but we still have a really, really good set of young players like Esther Okoronkwo, Debbie Abiodun, Tosin Demehin, who still have at least 10 more years to give to the game. So, and even look, and I get upset when people get on the back of Azizat Oshoala. These are players.
It's only elephant in the room. It's the elephant in the room.
She's given so much to the game, and I find it very distasteful, the way a few fans and even some media people have had a go at her. This girl's been on top for so long. She's had season after season of great football, and then even up until last season when she moved to the US, she delivered. She scored goals for BFC. She was the second top scorer behind Rachel Kundananji, and she took them to the playoffs, scored in the playoffs. And then this season is only barely 4 months old. She hasn't scored a goal, yes, but every player loses form. And we might say, yeah, she's out of form. She hasn't scored in the season, but that's no reason for anyone to have so much. I mean, you can criticize the fact that she is off form. That's acceptable. But, to come out and say she should retire and to even go as far as, making up so that she's retired, I find it not only disingenuous, but it's distasteful. And it upsets me to see things like that. And I think that, people who do that should be ashamed of themselves.
Have you heard any echoes that may be disturbing maybe the chemistry of the group, anything like that? Do you know if it's affected the group or the player herself?
No.
This kind of discourse?
Well, look, I had a chat with her as soon as I saw that, and she was like, you know what, she's not even going to dignify that with a response, and I totally understood, because that thing came out a day to the semi-final game against South Africa, and I mean, that was what was the point, a day before such a big game. And then I later heard from a member of the NFF board that she was in tears about it. So thankfully, it did not really affect the team in the sense that they got the job done. And I think these girls are resilient enough, to shake off these things and sort of like get themselves in a bubble and still go out there and get the job done.
And what have you made of their sort of progression through this WAFCON? Obviously, they only conceded a goal via penalty so far. So they've kept very solid defense from the very beginning. People were saying maybe they're struggling to score goals until they thrash Zambia 5-0. And then obviously that very, very important win against Banyana. How have you seen these sort of 5 matches unfold so far?
I think it's been great, to be honest. I mean, I don't know what games people are watching, to be honest, because if you look at
Algeria, they dominated. Yes, they didn't score, but
yeah,
it's only 4 shots or something.
That's where I was going. That's what I'm saying. I don't know what game these folks are watching, because the first game against Tunisia, they came out and they blasted Tunisia out of the park. They could have scored 5 or 6 goals in that game. The second game against Botswana were like, you know what, we're not having any of this. They sat back and they put 11 men, 10 men behind the ball, and so they struggled to break them down. They finally got the breakaway goal. The Algeria coach looked at her and thought, okay, I'm not having any of this either, And he said at the press conference, he said, look, the plan was to come here and disrupt and not even and just get a point. And that, because if they had tried to play, they would have got. And even with the low block that they played, they were still getting peppered with shots. And it took a stupendous, performance from the goalkeeper to not concede. So anybody who watches those 3 games and thinks this team is not playing well, needs to have their head examined, or maybe they don't know football. And then Zambia, who I thought were the team that was best equipped to play that low block transition game against the Super Falcons, decided to think, oh, okay, we have Rachel, we have Barbara, so we're equal with Nigeria, and let's trade punches. And that was the biggest mistake Zambia made. If Zambia had sat back like Botswana and Algeria, I think they would have had a chance, because with the speed of Barbara, with the speed of Rachel, and their finishing, because they are world-class finishers, they could have got behind the Nigeria defense, because Nigeria would have kept pushing and then left spaces behind that they could have exploited with their pace. But they choose to come forward. And you do that knowing that you have a dodgy defense, an average midfield, and practically no goalkeeper. So it was bound to happen, and that's exactly what happened. So the only team, as far as I was concerned, in this entire tournament that had the capacity to go toe to toe with Nigeria was South Africa, and even they did not go 100% out. I mean, you heard Desiree. They sat in the mid block, and then tried to get Nigeria on the counter. Unfortunately, they considered a penalty, and then that was only after they started playing. So that's the only team, and I still say till now that I think had the capacity to go trade blows with Nigeria and come out unscathed. Unfortunately, they did not. Now, every other team that tries to play, and this again, maybe probably takes me sort of like preempts maybe your question about the final, is that if Morocco think that they can believe their own hype, just like Zambia, and decide they want to go the same way with Nigeria and not play either a mid to low block, they're gonna get pasted.
What about the factor of the crowd, that atmosphere? Does that have perhaps any chance of maybe upsetting the Nigerian Super Falcons, or maybe tilting the odds a little bit in favor of the Atlas Lionesses at all? How are they going to react to playing in front of tens of thousands of people whistling actively whenever they have the ball?
Did you watch the 2016 final
I don't think so. Against Cameroon?
against Cameroon? Yeah. Now,
No.
that was the first time Cameroon was hosting a major tournament. They got to the final.
That was 60,000 people or something. Yeah.
That stadium was packed full of, including the president and no, I think the president's wife or something like that. So, and that was a very hostile environment. And what happened? Super Falcons won. So these girls,
But it's not the exact same players. Are you saying it's a DNA in the squad or
but
something?
it's a DNA exactly. That's where I was going again. The 2000 final was played in South Africa. Again, it was packed. It was hostile. And South Africa were looking to win their first ever tournament. And what happened? Quick goal in the 30th minute. And then by the time we scored the second goal, that was Stella Mbachu scored the second. I know Olaito Yusuf scored in after half an hour. And then Stella Mbachu scored on 72 minutes. And then the fans just knew it was over. And then they started pelting stuff on the field. And the game ended there because they were throwing things to the field. The player had to run away. Chaos broke out. So the Super Falcons are no strangers to playing in front of hostile, huge crowds in South Africa, Cameroon, so Morocco will be no different.
Two more questions. Number one, did you know about how I thought it was a very classy gesture that they went and they visited Gabi Salgado in the hospital and they gave her a shirt that was signed by the entire team, even on Instagram, just like posting supported messages. Any insight into how all of that happened? Whose idea was it? But I thought it was great to see them supporting the player that was obviously very tragically injured in the last 5 minutes of the South Africa match.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know that. I mean, after the game, the girls were distraught, and I think the team officials were like, you know what, they just talked about it. I think it just happened organically. It wasn't like something so like, you know what, how do we sort of like express our sympathy and stuff, and so it just kind of happened. The team media officer wrote a letter to the South African media officer, sort of like expressing condolences, and then the girls got together. Hey, you know what? Let's go visit her in hospital. So they got together, signed the shirt, and then a few of the girls went in and they spoke to South Africa official, and they were like, "Oh no, wow, why not come along?" So I think the way everything worked was so nice because there was just constant communication between the Nigeria side, the South Africa side, between the team, the other team, SAFA, NFF, and everything just worked so smoothly. I think it's a credit to both the teams, the ladies involved, and it's a credit to African football.
Agree, 100% agree. And my final question is a little bit of in my opinion, like an upsetting one, but throughout this tournament we've seen, and I think we've become accustomed to this, whether it's AFCON or WAFCON, we saw bonus rows with Banyana, their main sponsor, pull out. We've seen some people will say, like, in Morocco itself, you don't get a lot of advertising about the tournament itself. You get more people excited about the actual AFCON. You see the big stadium behind the Rabat Olympic complex. Malawi, for example, didn't participate in qualifiers because they said they didn't have the money, but they had the money for the men's team, but not the women's team. They have two, obviously, world-class players with the Chawinga sisters. And there's been, like, a string of criticism about, like, how, the women's game is not respected enough. And again, I don't think this is probably novel for the Wafcon. What would you say to all of that? Do you think there's too much of a focus on that and maybe not enough on the football and the girls itself? Or some people obviously even talked about the Jorge Vilda appointment and seeing as they think that's disrespectful to African women's football or to Moroccan women's football. What would you say about all the criticism? Necessary? Should exist maybe equally with praise for the actual good things that are happening as well? Or what's your entire viewpoint on all of that?
I think you should. I mean, two things can be true at the same time. We can walk and chew gum. So I don't think those conversations are mutually exclusive. We can have one and have the other. The girls since 91 have been delivering on the pitch, but the administration hasn't caught up with the football, you know, except for Morocco. Now,
Do you mean national federations or do you mean CAF or everything or?
both, the national federations and CAF. Now, over the last maybe couple of years or so, CAF has, tried. I mean, they've increased the prize money, even though it's still way below that of the men. They've expanded the competition. They've secured broadcast rights, and things are actually looking up for the women's game. But from a federation's point of view, I think it's embarrassing to be, disgraceful, not embarrassing, that, you know, they just don't seem to think that the women's game deserves as much investment as the men's game. And I say this with particular respect to Nigeria. It's disgraceful that is one of only what, 7 countries, correct me if I think that number is either 7 or 8, that have been to every World Cup since 1991. And yet, the best that Nigeria has done is the quarterfinals.
Think that's not due to the talent of the players. You think that's due to other factors?
It's not due to that. It's just due to the lack of proper administration and proper ambition on the part of the administrators. Now, if we could, if Nigeria invested a tenth of what Morocco has invested in women's football, we should be competing for the work. In fact, at this time, Nigeria, not even at this time, 4 World Cups ago, Nigeria should have been competing for the title, not just going there to make up the numbers. But it seems that Nigeria administrators are satisfied with, okay, we've qualified for the World Cup. Let's just go and try our best and come back. And that's just a defeatist mentality. And it's the same thing that I see across I think the only team or federation that actually has ambitions of saying, hey, look, you know what? Let's invest and then see what we can achieve, at a high level is Morocco. And I think that everybody else needs to take borrow a page out of the book, especially Nigeria. And I said it before, Nigeria has the longest running women's professional league in the entire world. No other country was running a professional women's league from 1990. And professional means the players are getting there, they are playing, it's their source of livelihood, they are getting paid to play, not amateurs, and that's exactly what they were doing. And yet, that league has not gone beyond the level of where it should be. It's still looking like an amateur competition. Players are having to go abroad to compete. So I think it's embarrassing and disgraceful that African federations are not doing as much as they should to develop the women's game. It's disgraceful that corporate and brands across Africa are not putting money into the women's game as much as they should, because we can see how quickly the women's game is developing. I'll tell you what, Arsenal's first international friendly match outside of England was in Nigeria when they played against the Super Falcons in 1990.
I did not know that. I did not know that.
And well, yeah, I'm telling you, that was in 2002-ish, 2003. That was their first game. And at the time, the England players were amateurs. They were like, so what used to happen was that most of the teams in Europe, the players, they were attached to the men's clubs, but so they would play for the teams and then work for the team sponsors. So their day job was to work with the team sponsors, and then part-time they would play football for the clubs. So that's how the game was back in the day. And Nigeria played against England, I think at the World Cup, was it 95 or so? And I think we came out with a draw or something like that. Now England, who have not qualified for every World Cup, went all the way to the World Cup final, or the semi-final?
Against Spain. No final against Spain. And they won the Euros.
Exactly. And Nigeria,
they pushed them to penalties. And Nigeria pushed them to penalties in the finals. And that England side, which went to the World Cup final, which won the Euros, which is in the final of this Euros as well.
Exactly.
Nigeria was there with them.
Exactly. So you can imagine what would happen if Nigerian football administrators would have some ambition and say, hey, look, you know what? Let's put some money behind this team. Let's develop this team. Let's put some let's turn it around and say, hey, look, let's change the mentality and believe in this team. Get a world-class coach, organize games, treat these girls like real, proper professionals. I mean, right now they're owing them allowances. And how much are the allowances? $1,000 each. And you can't even pay them. Now, listen, if these girls win this tournament, watch out, you're going to see all manner of people crawling out of the woodwork, trying to give them this and give them that. And where the heck, I'm sorry, I was about to go through some French right now, but what the heck were all of you when these girls needed to do all of to get here, And that's going to be the annoying part. So we need investment in women's football in Africa. We need people, not just federation, but corporates, CAF, everybody, to turn around, change their mentality, do a full 180, and believe in women's football in Africa. So,
thank you for educating us. Thank you for educating us. And just a point about Morocco, as you mentioned, in 2020, they decided to put in place what they call a Marshall Plan for women's football.
Yeah.
And they invested $6 million over the next few years to properly professionalize first, second, and third divisions of women's football. When I turn on the Moroccan state television for sport, Ariadia, I find Moroccan women's league matches on all the time. And of course, some of the local talent has really benefited. We see, especially players from the armed forces of Rabat, like we see Msoudi, we see Shebek, we see Aitul Hadjid, so on and so forth. So yeah, you see that and you wonder why other federations can't see the vision as well. But I don't sort of take more of your time. Do you have any last thing to add at all?
Well, I mean, look, all I can say is just let's have everybody come out there, watch this game, support the women. These women have done a lot, to get to where they are. And the best we can do as fans is to get behind all of them, win or lose. And I'm talking in terms of not just Nigeria, Morocco, but win or lose. These ladies deserve 100% our support. If you see a women's football game in Africa, go out and watch it. If it doesn't matter, I mean, it doesn't cost that much. Go out and watch it. See it on TV, go out and watch it. Let's support these women. We all need to look at African women's football and know that this has got to be the future. I mean, Morocco qualified for the first time to the World Cup, got to the quarterfinals. South Africa, quarterfinals. Zambia, the Olympic Games, Banda was calling for fun. So that tells you that the talent is there. I mean, look at the NWSL, the African players who went there, Oshala, Banda, Kundananji. I look at even Gift Monday. They go to the toughest, what is supposed to be one of the toughest leagues in the world, and they're walking it like it's nothing. So I think that we need to have a change in mentality as Africans and look to the women's game and think, look, hey, you know what? We shouldn't be going to the World Cup to compete. We should be going to the World Cup to freaking win the thing.
Change in mentality. You see why he's the best? Thank you, Colin Udoh. I think you all know him. If you don't know him, what are you doing? You can find all of his articles covering the Wafcon on ESPN Africa. I'm going to put all of his social media in the description below. Colin, thank you one last time for joining me.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate you having me on here.
Take care, man.